Patrick McKeown, welcome back to Roll with the Punches. How are you?
Good, Tiffanee. Good to be here.
Yeah, I've been very excited. Very excited. I was very excited when we first spoke to you on the show, and you blew my absolute head off with science around breathing. In fact, it was only it's only the other day my coach and my boss at the boxing gym gave me a little nudge about my nasal breathing again because I went in raving about. I was raving about it to people in the classes, and he's never let it drop since. So, how have you been?
It's been good. It's busy.
Yep.
New things happening, so it's all good. And awareness of the breath has never been greater than I ever remember in 20 years. So yeah, there's something really happening. It's good.
Yeah. What do you think's driving that?
I'm not sure. Like when I started in 2002, it was a very, very slow trajectory, and it continued for about 12, 13 years to 2015. 2015, it started picking up. And the last 2 years, especially with COVID, for some reason, maybe it has drawn people's attention inwards and onto their breathing and just how important the breath is, and probably that we don't give it consideration. But I think it's high time because it's had a bad rap for so many years. And, partly that is because the way it was being taught and put out there and the information, and it didn't get the depth to which it needed. So I think now it's really, it's starting to open up. So it's great.
Yeah. Do you think it's because there's more different, I guess, dynamics around? You've got sports people looking for sports performance. You've got mental health people looking for relief from their anxieties. You've got different medical illnesses that have a focus on that now as well.
The medical people haven't really delved into it that much, not to which they should do. They have pretty much ignored it. Obstructive sleep apnea, there's a huge role for breathing there, breathing through the nose during sleep. Sleep medicine has overlooked it, but it's the people outside of medicine who have embraced it more. And, in fairness, Wim Hof would have put breathing on the map. James Nestor, his new book, Breath, has definitely put it on the map. Yeah. And there's a few things that are after happening together. So it's coming from a number of angles, but unfortunately, the medical industry has been very slow to embrace breathing. And just the points that you made there, all of the major disciplines of medicine are influenced by the breath.
Yeah.
And anybody, even just looking at a mental health perspective, somebody with anxiety and panic disorder, how can you address these conditions unless you address breathing? Because those individuals are going to be physiologically in that state of increased sympathetic drive or fight or flight response. And it's through the breath that we can have to bring a balance in the autonomic nervous system, and sleep is the other one. So and they all go together, breathing, sleep, and the mind. We can't separate one from the other.
Yeah. Now, you showed me as soon as we jumped on your brand new book, another new book. Is that your third book?
No, it's my 9th.
It's your 9th. All right. Yeah. Well,
I started writing back in 2003 with the first one. I suppose it was my way of getting it out there into the big bad world.
Yeah. So tell us about your latest book. Tell us how it differs from the other 8.
It would have some similarities to a book called Anxiety Free, which I wrote back in 2010. And Anxiety Free was bringing together mindfulness with functional breathing patterns. And it was based on courses that I was doing back then, because I felt that mindfulness wasn't enough, even though that, it's very popular. Atomic Focus is for the individual who wants to improve concentration and attention span. And concentration is our ability to hold our attention on one thing. Our attention span is the length of time that we can hold our attention on one thing. Now, from the child to the university student, to the corporate worker, to the sports person, to military, to family life, those 2 traits are necessary. We have to be able to hold our attention on doing what we are doing, and we have to be able to hold it there for a period of time. But the mind now is very much distracted. We have external distractions with information technology, and we have internal distractions with a lot of thought activity going through the mind. And education has gave us the ability to think, but it hasn't gave us the ability to stop thinking. It hasn't gave us the ability to take control over the mind. And it hasn't gave us the ability to bring a stillness between thoughts, to hold our attention on doing what we're doing. So, you know, society demands that we can concentrate, but nobody's teaching us how. And this is looking at concentration and attention span from a simple perspective: deep sleep, which is absolutely fundamental, and with that, nose breathing. And then we call it invincible breathing, but it's functional breathing patterns and different breathing exercise from the oxygen advantage. And then we bring in breath aware, body aware, and mind aware, and that's self-actualization. So it's kind of going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, because no longer in the Western world do we need food and shelter. You know, that's kind of a given. It's taken for granted. It's not that we don't need it, but it's there. So the motivation, and for us to reach our full potential, I don't think any of us are going to reach our full potential unless we have the capacity to control our own thoughts to some degree, or unless we have the capacity to control our mind and to understand what's going on there. And, you know, this is getting worse. Religion did play some purpose in terms of bringing a stillness to the mind. And now that religion is not being embraced, and that's fine, there's a void, and we need to step in and fill that void, because human beings, if the mind is racing, if we can't calm our own mind, we will typically resort to alcohol, to drugs, to prescription drugs, etc. And they don't work, you know. So it really comes back to that. Yeah, it's like, if I was to say one thing about this book is one that the breath has the biggest potential for change, because the mind is that filter through which we experience all of our life. All life's experience are filtered through the mind. And yet we don't stand back and ask what's going on. And it's not about mindfulness, because I'll give you this example. Between 2010 and 2013, I had 3,000 people coming through courses that I was doing here in Ireland. And they were short courses, 2 and 3 hour courses. We could have 20 and 30 people coming to a course. I would say that 90 to 95% were female. Men weren't attending. And from that, I was wondering, why on earth are males not attending breathing courses? Why is it predominantly female? Because it was the men that were suffering most with anxiety. It was the men who were dying most by suicide. So that's why I brought out the oxygen advantage. It was very much on that basis that I wanted to bring out a high performance breathing. So now the atomic focus is also geared towards the person with ambition and talent. And by directing them to improve their concentration and attention span, in doing that, we are also teaching them how to control thought processes. I didn't want to put out a book called Anxiety Free the way I did back in 2010, because people won't pick it up off the bookshelf, and they don't want to be seen walking down the street with a book, Anxiety Free, in their hand. Go for atomic focus. And, you know, that's where it's at.
I love that. I love it. And it's just like when you first said that, you showed me the book, Atomic Focus. It's about attention and concentration and focus. And then explaining what was really underneath all that. Isn't it interesting how everything we do in life, we have to market to kind of capture people the right way? And isn't it interesting? It really shows that perspective around how a lot of athletes and sports people, when they get injured, can have mental health problems because these practices and this performance focus that we have are all kind of reliant on those mindfulness practices.
Totally. And if you look at it, you know, an athlete who is achieving well and doing well, they very often have perfectionist tendencies, and they set very high demands on themselves. And, you know, 20 years ago, an athlete had to be concerned mainly about their performance during the sports. Nowadays, athletes have to be concerned about performance on 2 levels. One is performance on social media, and the other is performance on sports. So they've got 2 pressures coming in. And I featured a number of athletes in the book. And one is number 4. He was number 4 tennis player in the world, Robin Söderling, and he's a Swedish champion. But he had to retire at the age of 26. And at the time, it was put out there that he had a fever. And that's as a result of causing his retiring. But it was more, he had burnout. And he had burnout from the stress of achieving and constant go, go, go.
Yeah.
And, you know, we interviewed Robin there about 2-3 months ago with Daniel Paulson. And he spoke about, he says, he couldn't really understand when he looks back, even though he was number 4 in the world, that all he was doing was hitting this yellow ball across the net. And yet how it took so much of a toll on him. And it took him quite a while. And it was through breathing that it really came about. And we asked him the question, you know, would you have embraced this when you were in your early 20s? And he probably would have said no. And that's the thing, coming back to your question, that athletes they're hit by so many different things in terms of people are saying, do this, do that, do the other. And how can they differentiate between what is really for them and what's not? And you have to make choices. And that's why I suppose using the words, I suppose ultimately we as human beings, we have to recognize that, yes, there is an issue there before we change it. And I suppose this is self-awareness, and we really need to be self-aware. And I spoke to one of our instructors is a captain in the Swedish army, but he's also a psychologist. And they brought out this combat operational stress code for soldiers, because soldiers, of course, are going to be prone to burnout. And it's got different zones. And the soldier then knows which zone they are in. And if they're in the green zone, all is good. If they're under a bit of stress and they go into the yellow zone, that's fine once they get back into the green zone. But if the stress continues, they can go into the orange zone. And in the orange zone, this is when they're really losing their temper and rage, etc. And if it goes any further, it goes into the red zone. This is where they need clinical help. So for, you know, to know what zone we are in, to get an idea. And the colors are pretty easy. And when you read the guidelines, you can get an idea, am I in this zone or am I in that zone? So, yeah, I suppose the awareness is really happening now. I'm not sure how it is. I'm sure it's the same in Australia as it is everywhere else, you know, that what can we achieve in life unless we have the capacity to control our own mind? Nothing. We certainly don't have happiness. We can achieve all the money you want. It's useless. It's useless unless we're able to bring that quietness to the mind.
It's so true. It's so true. I just moved house I don't know, a week ago. Feels like, I don't know how long it feels like. But when with this change of environment, I was like, I'm going to implement a whole bunch of new good habits. But one of the things I noticed is how I had this immediate deliberate change of pace. And when I noticed it, I probably wasn't that deliberate at the start. It was a change of pace. But when I noticed it, I've been very deliberate about maintaining it. I have a tendency to rush everywhere, to do more, to keep, you know, putting more and more and more in my day, on my plate, you know, in my agenda. And I end up rushing, like literally rushing often for no reason. And, you know, I was driving home yesterday and driving past a little park and just thought to myself, like sometimes I think, imagine the first time I drove down these roads and I looked at that beautiful park that's right near where I live, and imagine if I didn't live here and I'm looking at it now and feeling how I would feel if this wasn't my neighborhood and how beautiful it is. And, you know, I just think we never have that presence, do we? It's true
that. So what you're saying is because we often live in our heads, that we're not really seeing what's going on around us. So it's there in the face. And we're not living in the present moment as well. And I know, like, people bandy around the whole thing about present moment. We've got two choices. We're either stuck living in thoughts, drowning in thoughts, immersed in thinking, or we're connected with what's going on around us. And the only way that we can experience life is when we have our attention.
Yeah.
And we're using our senses. And if you talk to any 6 or 7-year-old child, they'll tell you, what are your senses? Your senses are your sight, your sense of smell, your sense of taste, touch. You know, so in terms of how often do we really bring our senses, our full attention onto our senses, and that we look and that we're really seeing, that we listen, that we really listen, that we smell, that we taste, that we touch. And when we do it, we tend to do it for a very fleeting moment. So the person driving by the park, they look at the park for a brief second, and then they label it and they say, oh, it's beautiful, and back into the head again. Or going to a nice restaurant, start eating the food and have a couple of spoonfuls and they taste it, and then stuck in the head. And the more we can bring our attention out of the mind and to experience life, we see much more and we miss less. But present moment awareness, again, it mightn't be the easiest place to start, or at least it wasn't for me. I was that guy as well back in the 1990s, racing mind and running around, and society is driving us this way. There really is a huge drive and a pressure. You have to do well in your exams. You need to get a job. You need to get into a relationship. You need to get a house, all of this stuff. And it's relentless. And as you reach once you reach one goalpost, the goalpost then shifts, and then you're chasing the next one.
Yeah.
And I remember going into university in first year, and I had terrible concentration, really poor attention span, and highly strung. And I don't consider that I had anxiety or anything like that, but I had a racing mind. And I got into university in first year, and it was in a constant rush to get to the end of the 4 years that I don't think I even enjoyed when I look back at it. So then when I think about like how I came across by accident the importance of breathing through the nose and breathing light and changing the physiology. Because if you're in that state as I was, a mouth breather and a fast breather and an upper chest breather, naturally we're in that increased stress response. And you can do all of the present moment awareness in the world. It's not going to work as long as the physiology is untouched. So for me, when I got my mouth closed during sleep, it was huge. I started to wake up feeling alert. Already, if you're alert, waking up, you're calmer. If you're waking up feeling groggy, you're going to be more likely to be angst or contrary. And then changing breathing patterns to light and slow, and not by taking these full big breaths that are often talked about. Again, I did it. I practiced full big breaths, and I went into one university exam, as I probably said in the last time, anxious going into the exam, took a walk for about 3 or 4 minutes before I sat into the exam hall. And I took these full big breaths because this is what you hear around. You hear it in studios all over the place. And I walked into the exam hall dizzy. We don't increase oxygen and blood flow. We don't increase blood flow and oxygen delivery to the brain by taking full big breaths. We really have to embrace the importance of carbon dioxide. It's about light breathing. Light breathing with normal carbon dioxide pressure will help to bring a calmness to the mind and body. Slow breathing, we can also cause the vagus nerve to secrete acetylcholine, which causes slowing of the heart, and that brings a calmness to the mind and body. Deep breathing with lateral expansion and contraction of the lower ribs using the diaphragm or optimal movement of the diaphragm also brings a calmness to the mind. And the nose is essential to that. And instead of just honing in on one dimension of breathing, we should be embracing all three. And this is the depth to which we were talking about. And if people want to hyperventilate if you want, if it's a stressor. So if you're taking these full, fast, big breaths for 20 breaths, that's a hyperventilation. That stresses the body and mind. Then do a long breath hold. That's a stressor. But always remember that if you're stressing your body and mind, always bring it into recovery. And do then light, slow, and deep breathing afterwards for about 3 minutes for a reset.
It's interesting when you were talking before about the, like red zone, green zone, and I was thinking how these days, I don't know, sometimes I don't know if we're heading in the right direction or the opposite direction, because now we have these gadgets that tell us, that measure us and tell us when we need to recover and when we need to, but in part that's really making us continue to switch off from the internal feeling from just checking in. Like, we've already switched off a lot of awareness on checking in with our body, feeling, being in the moment, feeling our breath, feeling everything. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh no, I just can completely disassociate from all of that stuff. And I'm just going to look at my watch, and that's going to tell me what I need to do.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It really is.
It becomes like that psychological gamification. So we have gyms that have the MyZone belts, and they're great to a point until all of a sudden your style of training is just to push your heart rate, when really your goals might be to build strength and have functional fitness. But you're going in there and you're seeing those colors on the board going, oh, I've got to hit the red, I've got to hit the red, I've got to hit the red. And so you're getting pulled into a game, but away from your actual, your personal goals.
I suppose it's like this: whenever we're doing something, to have a certain amount of our attention in the task, but also a certain amount of attention dispersed throughout the body, that we can embrace both. I'm not a great user of technology, maybe just because I'm, the generation that I didn't grow up with it. But you could embrace both, and any individual can embrace. The problem with technology is that it's driving performance, and the technology is measuring. The very measurement could hamper their performance, because it's putting a psychological stress on the individual to attain this goal. And that in turn then can be self-defeating. It's like somebody going to sleep and they're saying, well, I'm going to measure my sleep now. Now sleep is a performance. And when you make sleep a performance, you're probably more likely to have insomnia. Yes. Or somebody saying to somebody, try and relax. How can you try and relax? Instead, we have to allow it to happen. But yeah, I think one of the best things is, for any walk of life, even a boxer going into a ring, is to go into a ring with your attention dispersed throughout the body, that you're fighting with every cell of the body. You go out on stage, if you're doing a public presentation, a certain amount of attention is in your mind. You have your attention in the present moment, but also your attention dispersed throughout the body. There's a stillness in the body that's always there. So even if the situation presents itself as being a difficult situation, you can always tap into that stillness, and it's that anchor. And that's what's very important about it. And I think, Tiffanee, I put a couple of comments as well, because imagine that you're a boss and there's a difficult situation in a company, and you've got two employees to choose. One employee is constantly sighing and, feeling always angst and racing mind. And another employee is quite calm and controlled. And here you, as a boss, you have this difficult situation to address. Who are you going to hand it to? Are you going to hand it to the person who is sighing in that state of a little bit of stress and panic? Or are you going to hand it to the person who's calm and controlled? And of course, intuitively, we're going to hand it to the person who's calm and controlled. We can change our physiology. I was the other person. Many other people are the other person. Some people are uniquely calm, and that's their genetics, and the environment, of course, that they were raised up in. And our environment and the genetics coming together, that's going to have quite a role to play in terms of our ability and our capacity to have that quietness of mind. And what I mean by a quietness of mind is that it's not that the individual is a vegetable, but that you can bring a stillness, and it's almost that you tap into a part of the brain that's just at the top of the back of the brain. And when you bring that, you automatically come out of thought. And it's a nice place to be. And this is what would be flow states. Athletes and coaches talk about flow state. I contacted your friend and I sent a question, and I said, how can we achieve flow states if we have sleep apnea, if we're snoring hard, if we have insomnia, if we have fast upper chest breathing? How can we achieve flow states? In other words, are flow states only for the individual who has got the right physiology? And that would be a nice question. I'd love to get the answer for it. I haven't got the answer yet, but I'm putting the question out there.
I'm on team getting you and Stephen Kotler together on a podcast, because I want to hear that conversation. What was I going to ask then? Oh, it's gone now. Bugger. No, I'll come back to it. Tell me about the female breathing. You mentioned last time that's very different. I'm interested in that.
It's very different, and it's been very different for a long time, and it was recognized as being different since 1915, that carbon dioxide levels in the female are lower typically than men, and during the monthly cycle that hormones are going to influence breathing. And the impact is quite extraordinary. Like, it's a huge impact. So during the monthly cycle, so you have menstruation, you have the follicular phase, you've got ovulation, you've got luteal secretory, and it's post-ovulation, so mid-luteal phase, and I think it's between days 10 and days 22, but other females say between days 10 and up as far as days 28. There's an increase in progesterone, there's an increase in estrogen. Progesterone is a respiratory stimulant. It causes it to go faster and harder. Carbon dioxide levels can drop by as much as 25%. Now, this is huge because normal carbon dioxide in the blood is 40 millimeters of mercury. And if you have a 25% drop, you're dropping, say, from 40 millimeters of mercury down to 30. Every 1 millimeter drop of CO2 reduces blood flow to the brain by 2%. So that could result in a 20% reduction of blood flow to the brain. I'm not saying continuously, but intermittently. Now, the other impact is that it does cause an arousal of the central nervous system, and it increases pain perception, and it reduces pain thresholds. It affects sleep, insomnia, and it also affects panic disorder and anxiety. So the symptoms of PMS can be directly attributable to changes in hormones causing a change in breathing. And so there's something that needs to be considered there, because even for an athlete, should the female athlete be training hard in the early stages of the monthly cycle and going a little bit easier during post-ovulation or mid-luteal phase? Because if breathing is already being hampered and breathing is faster and harder, what impact is that going to have when the female is doing physical performance? And I know studies have looked at this and say there's no difference between the performance, but I won't really wonder, because the females with the strongest PMS are those who have a greater sensitivity to the buildup of carbon dioxide. So in other words, you would expect them to have a low breath hold time. You would expect their breathing already to be a little bit faster and harder. So this is not going to affect all females the same. It will depend on their everyday breathing. If you have a female with a control pose or a Bolt score of, we'd say one of our own instructors, she has a Bolt score of 30 seconds. And this is in the early stage of the monthly cycle. And post-ovulation, it dips down to about 25 seconds. She's going to be pretty okay, because she still has, a relatively good Bolt score. And for those people who don't know what a Bolt score is, it's the measurement of your breath hold time after a normal exhalation, and you're timing it in seconds until you feel the first definite desire to breathe. It's not the maximum length of your breath hold time. It's just first physiological response to breathe. But if you have a female with a Bolt score of about 10 seconds in the early stages of the monthly cycle, post-ovulation, her Bolt score is dropping, because it's going to drop. She's really going to experience symptoms. So I think females should be tracking their breathing and tracking their Bolt score, and just seeing, is there a correlation between the symptoms that they are experiencing and the change in their breathing? And it could be that hormonal changes are causing the change to breathing, and it's the change to breathing and result loss of carbon dioxide from the blood through the lungs, which is bringing on their symptoms.
This is really interesting, because this morning the podcast that I released was on PMDD. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, it's more severe. Yeah, yes.
Very severe. And the girl, Adriana, who I was speaking to, one of the things that has helped her the most has been a meditation and breathing practice.
Yes. And there could be that nice link there, but more attention. You could ask then, well, why has it been documented for 100 plus years? But yet most females are not aware of it. Like, I was in the breathing space for 20 years. I only started looking into this about 1-2 years ago. And it was just by chance. There's an Irish musician here, and I was working with him, and he spoke about his fiance going through these symptoms. And he asked a question, and I said, yes. I said, there is a relationship there. I knew there was a relationship, but I didn't really delve into it. And then when I started looking into it, I was saying, this is absolutely incredible, that very few people are talking about it and putting it out there. It's huge. And the reason being is because most research on breathing is done by men. And even when breathing research is done on women, they don't take into consideration changes in the monthly cycle. So
isn't that crazy?
It really needs that research. It's crazy.
Yeah. It's kind of mind-blowing how much...
Dan.
Sorry, my internet.
Sorry to put across you.
No, that's all right. My internet's a little bit jumpy at the moment, so it's okay.
If you look at this, if you look at panic disorder affects 2 to 3 times more female than men. Panic disorder. And panic disorder has always traditionally been, regarded that carbon dioxide plays some role. Even the very instance of telling somebody to breathe in and out of a brown paper bag if they were having a panic attack, yes. That was all about trapping and pooling carbon dioxide to bring it back into the lungs, to increase it in the blood, to increase blood flow and oxygen delivery to the brain. 2 to 3 times more females have panic disorder than men. Now, it would be very interesting to track those females with panic disorder and to see post-ovulation what impact is hormonal and breathing changes having on their disorder. And it's not that it can affect epilepsy, bipolar, asthma, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, and anxiety. And they are common enough symptoms. And in terms of, female diagnosed with fibromyalgia, they could meet the criteria
the internet's
in the luteal phase.
I've missed a bunch of that. The internet's really broken up partway through. You're listing the fibromyalgia and the conditions.
Okay, so with hopefully now it's a bit steady because it should be okay, but who knows?
I've just moved, so it's probably my end.
No. But yeah, so females who, going through the luteal phase, it has been documented to affect their epilepsy, bipolar, asthma, all symptoms of respiration, wheezing, coughing, breathlessness, etc. The feeling of air hunger, fatigue, fibromyalgia, panic disorder, etc. And females who are meeting the diagnostic criteria for fibromyalgia during the luteal phase of the cycle don't necessarily meet the diagnostic criteria in the early stages, because it's a syndrome and it's a collection of different symptoms, including fatigue, muscle pain, etc. There really needs to be something done in it. And also females then, post-menopause, they sleep disorder breathing increases by up to 200-300%.
Wow.
So yeah, it's for obstructive sleep apnea and upper airway resistance syndrome. And it's because progesterone protects the female from the airway collapsing. And post-menopause, when the hormone levels off, the airway then is more liable to collapse. And obstructive sleep apnea in the female population up to about 50 years of age affects about 9%. And after 50 years of age, it increases to about 27%. So that's a 300% increase. And night sweats are associated with sleep apnea. So now you're talking about hot flushes or hot flashes, depending on what country. And you'll see that, again, very scant research, but we had some anecdotal evidence of females sending in that just when they start taping their mouth at night to breathe through their nose, hot flashes reduced.
Wow. What about the breathing for children?
Again, this has been something that has been around for a long, long time. I've got a journal, Dental Cosmos, written back in 1909. It spoke about the child with the mouth open in school. The child is not able to pay attention. The face of the child is dull and expressionless. the teacher is accusing the child, of not paying attention, of not keeping up with studies. And incredibly, 25 to 50% of children persistently mouth breathe. We know a study by Karen Bonnock in Stratford-upon-Avon that was published in the journal Pediatrics in 2012. She looked at over 11,000 children over a 5-year period. This is an incredible study. And children, if they had sleep disorder breathing by 5 years of age, if it was untreated, and sleep disorder breathing just includes snoring, sleep apnea, hypopnea. But if untreated by age 5, these kids had a 40% increased risk of special education needs by age 8. And the reason being is because during childhood, during the formative years, so when the child is growing up in the early parts, say age 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, their brain is developing during sleep. And if they're not getting that deep sleep, it can cause brain damage. And when you're reading this, you're saying, what on earth is going on here? Now, in terms of the childhood population, up to 15% of the childhood population have sleep disorder breathing. Much of it gets brushed under the carpet. Snoring doesn't tend to be recognized whatsoever. No child should snore. Sleep apnea gets recognized because a child, if, for example, they have a compromised airway and they've enlarged adenoids and tonsils, etc., that's causing disruptions to their breathing during sleep. And if they stop breathing for, say, 2 or more breaths, it's considered an apnea in children. But children with sleep apnea, they don't grow as quickly for their age. So they don't thrive. That can be picked up on because the child is not developing as quick. But snoring doesn't get picked up on. Mouth breathing doesn't get picked up on. The whole shape of our face is influenced by whether we breathe with our mouth open or closed. And
Really?
having the tongue resting in the roof of the mouth. There were studies conducted in 1975 by EP Harvold. He was a Canadian orthodontist and he had an interest in function. Now, what I mean by this is that there's 2 schools of orthodontistry. You've got your traditional school, which is saying that the child has got crooked teeth because the teeth are too big. The child has inherited the big teeth maybe from the dad and the smaller jaws from the mom. And you have big teeth and small jaws, and as a result, teeth are overcrowded. And a traditional orthodontist may then decide, let's extract teeth. Let's take out teeth to make room for the existing teeth, and then we'll put on wire braces to bring the teeth together. The functional orthodontist is saying, the reason that the child has got crooked teeth is because the jaw is too small. It's not because the teeth are too big. The jaw is too small, so the jaw is not able to house all 32 teeth. And the functional orthodontist is saying, let's expand the jaw to make room for the existing teeth. Now, the benefits of expanding the jaw and forward development of the jaw is that it can help open up the airway. We have to consider our tongue. Our tongue has got 2 places to be. It's either resting in the roof of the mouth or it's falling back into the throat. A good airway is the size of our thumb. So we don't have much room for error. And if our jaws are set back, as mine are, my maxilla, which is my top jaw, is set back. You know that because my nose looks quite big because the jaw isn't forward enough in the face. So a big nose is not necessarily because the nose is big, but it's because the jaws are set back. Mandible is set back, so there's always likelihood of a double chin because the jaws are set back. So you've got that double chin because of, you haven't got that forward growth. So when you see people with a double chin, it's not just aesthetically not the best, but it could be a health concern because it could point out that there's jaws set back, which means a compromised airway, which would increase the risk of sleep disorder breathing. Mouth breathing kids, it alters the shape of the face. Their faces are longer, narrower, high upper palate, infringed nasal cavity, compromised airway. And a mouth-breathing child is not going to become a top athlete. That mouth-breathing child does not thrive. I don't think mouth-breathing kids will reach their full potential. I was a mouth-breathing child. Nobody would ever pass any heed on whether the mouth is open or closed. But yet our ancestors did. And we know that mouth-breathing is a relatively recent phenomenon. Anthropologists looking at skulls, the first documented cases of crooked teeth happened about 400 years ago. And this was when they unearthed bodies from upper middle class graves. So these people had access to sugar and refined foods, causing changes to the shape of the face. But we have to consider breathing here. Breathing and the food that we eat are also linked. And a child with the mouth open, the tongue is not resting in the roof of the mouth, and the tongue is necessary for craniofacial growth because it's the pressures exerted by the tongue in the roof of the mouth that's helping to drive the jaws forward. And if you look at a beautiful person, you'll typically see when they smile, you can count quite a number of teeth. And, you know, I know that most Australians are fans of the royal family. So some of them anyway. Look at Prince William and Kate Middleton and get a photograph of the two of them standing side by side smiling. And when you look at Prince William, count the number of teeth that you see. So when he has a smile, you'll see that you might count maybe eight teeth. And then look at Kate Middleton. When she's smiling, count the number of teeth that you can see. And you'll see a big difference. And that's a narrow jaw versus a wide jaw. A person with a wide jaw has plenty of room for the tongue. And if you've got plenty of room for the tongue in the mouth, you're less likely to have an encroached airway during sleep.
So when you see people's faces, do you have a pretty good idea as to whether they're mouth breathing or nasal breathing?
Yeah, and there's no question. And
what do I do?
Anybody, well, you know, anybody is going to pick up on this. I remember walking down the street in London with Dr. Mike Mew, and he would even say in terms of class 1, class 2, class 3 malocclusions. So he was able to grade them orthodontically just by looking at their faces. But, you know, it comes with experience. So when you're looking at somebody as well, they're smiling. Also look if they have black triangles either side of their teeth. Because if they have black triangles there, it will indicate that their jaws are too small for their mouth. And this is why extractions are not ideal. You know, Dr. Derek Mahoney is based in Randwick in Sydney. And for decades, he has been putting it out there that we shouldn't be doing extractions. We should be developing the jaws. And he's got a team of ear, nose, and throat doctors and dentists and orthodontists who understand about function. And it's really, really important. Like, he's a world leader in this field. And yet you'll still have orthodontists who will insist on extractions. Does it make sense? We have a certain amount of teeth in our head. We don't want them to be extracted.
Oh my God, Dad. What is driving? What's the catalyst for, I mean, I guess especially kids, what's causing them to mouth breathe?
Yeah, it's a good question, and there's probably not one answer to it. I think the food that we're eating when we're transitioning from an infant to an adult, our ancestors, we would have been eating, you know, maybe lamb off a bone. We were eating hard vegetables. That would have helped to develop the jaws because there's chewing power there and you're developing the muscles. Nowadays, of course, we're giving kids, everything is pureed. Wow. And breastfeeding is also, you know, society demands on the mother to go back to work. Breastfeeding is not just about nutrition, but it's about manipulation of the muscles of the face necessary for craniofacial growth. It takes work for the baby to take milk from the breast. And by doing that, they're also developing the face, the growing face. Whereas a bottle, just the milk will flow from a bottle. There's no work involved. And the teat of the bottle also can be a problem because it's small and it's going to shape the palate. Like, our palates are very malleable during infancy. And, you know, even looking at children, looking at a study in 2012, looking at 7 infants who died abruptly as a result of sudden infant death syndrome. All of these children had high upper palates, could have been avoided, but yet it's not been recognized in the hospitals. My daughter was born with a high upper palate. Genetics play a role. My genetics are a bit messed up. And of course, she's going to inherit my genetics. And, you know, that high upper narrow palate, and we spotted it earlier on. And that can be developed. And even for a mother with a healthcare professional, putting on a pair of gloves, putting their thumbs into the roof of the child's mouth, and gently exerting a pressure for about 5 to 10 seconds, and then letting go. And doing that a few times, maybe a couple of times a day, and it'll gently start widening the palate, because you don't want a very high upper palate, because a high upper palate, which is the roof of the mouth, is infringing on the nasal cavity. Instead, you want a wide shaped maxilla. And as I said, when the shape of the maxilla is wide, there's plenty of room for the tongue. So what are other factors there? I think it's really a combination of genetics. Tongue tie is another issue. So if the piece of string that's holding the tongue to the floor of the mouth is quite small, the baby then can't breastfeed, because of course they can't get their tongue from the floor of the mouth. And as a result, then the baby then is more liable to chomp on the mother. The mother gets uncomfortable. The baby can't get enough milk, so the baby isn't thriving. And then the bottle is introduced, instead of looking at the child to see if the child is tongue-tied, just to release it. Because midwives, I remember when I was in France, Paris, I was in Bordeaux at a congress in 2016, and they spoke about midwives in the 16th century France. They had, sounds a bit gross, but they had an extra long fingernail. And if the baby was born, if the baby was tongue-tied, the midwife just used her fingernail to clip to release the tongue-tie.
Oh, God.
But it's a case of life or death, so, you know.
Oh. But for your everyday new mum, no one's whipping their baby home going, oh, how's this palate look?
Yes, but the hospital should be.
Yeah, right.
Like, it should be identified. If the airway is compromised, you know, when babies are born, the soft palate and the epiglottis meet, so the baby can't physically breathe well through the mouth. So the baby has to rely on nasal breathing. But if you have a baby then with a high upper narrow palate, with the nasal cavity being infringed, and then if that baby gets a head cold, which they're liable to do, if they have a runny nose or a stuffy nose, and anatomically they can't breathe through the mouth, well, now they're in trouble. That paper by Dr. Christian Guilleminault, who was considered to be a founding father of sleep medicine. All of the children preceding that had rhinitis. Rhinitis just means a stuffy nose. Could it be as much to say that the children died because of a stuffy nose on top of an already compromised airway, which could have been avoided?
Wow. Far out. Like, who would ever have thought that there's so much to breathing, honestly?
Yeah, no, it's there. That's why I was saying, you know, I would love medicine to look into it. I really, really would. And I would love the dental profession, the industry, to look into it. There's wonderful doctors who understand it, wonderful medical doctors. There's wonderful dentists who understand it, but the professions haven't give it the attention it deserves, but it's crying out for attention. And that's why, you know, I felt that was the way it was back in 2002. And I said, I need to get this information out there. And that's why I wrote the first book, was Asthma Free Naturally, in 2003. And I put it out there, and I put it out into the hands of people with asthma. It wasn't going to be driven by the asthma societies. It wasn't going to be driven by the respiratory consultants or the medical doctors, but it was going to be driven at a grassroots level. And that's where this is happening. Because I suppose it comes back to this, Tiffanee. If people feel a difference as a result of making changes to their breathing, and you know, I'd always say to anybody, if you've got a stuffy nose, you can decongest your nose within about a couple of minutes by simply holding your breath. And for people to practice it, don't do it if you're pregnant or if you've got serious medical issues, but, you know, to open up your nose, simply take a normal breath in through your nose and out through your nose, pinch your nose and hold your nose, and then walk around your room. Just walk around holding your breath and continue walking while holding your breath until you feel a medium to strong air hunger, and then let go and breathe in through your nose. Wait about a minute and do it again. Do it 5 or 6 times and your nose will open up. And even with a head cold, your nose opens up. Hay fever, your nose will open up.
Wow.
Now, if you continue breathing through your nose works much better. And the functions of the nose, you know, you use that word far out. The nose has got so many functions when it comes to breathing, and the mouth has no function whatsoever when it comes to breathing. The mouth is just an entry point. It's a hole whereby air can come straight down the throat into the lungs. There was a very interesting paper written in 2012 looking at partners, and say, for example, you have the female and she's on the pill and she meets the male partner, and then they get married or whatever. They're in a long-term relationship. The female will have selected her male partner based, and vice versa, based on smell. Smell is part of it that comes into it. But the pill is influencing the sense of these senses in terms of the female. The paper looked at what happens then when females come off the pill after a few years. They start looking at their partners differently. Like, and you're thinking, you're like, this is kind of going to a totally different level, and you're saying this is bizarre. But throughout evolution, we relied on our nose for so many different functions, sniffing out danger. And we were acutely aware as, you know, as human beings of just how important the nose was, just as the animals are. An animal, a deer which is grazing out in the wildlands, that animal is eating with its mouth and breathing through his nose or her nose. And the nose is that acute sense that if there's any predator coming, the nose is going to pick up on it and the animal is going to go out of there. Can you imagine a deer out in the wildlands eating and breathing through its mouth at the same time? Well, the deer is going to be for dinner.
Makes you wonder why, I don't know, why we were built this way. We need to use a manual.
We were built fine, but our pace of life has really been too quick.
Yeah, that's so true. So your new book you mentioned is a little bit more digestible, easily digestible or easily implemented. Big text. Sounds like a sort of book I could read. Yeah. Your other books, were they a lot more scientific?
Some of them are. The Breathing Cure was very much a scientific book. It's 190,000 words. It's small font. I wanted to kind of, I think breathing has been just bandied around, you know. Think of how breathing has been traditionally taught. It was always in the robes and the open sandals and, you know, left of field. And unfortunately, it's given a bad rap because there's people saying, now what I'd like you to do is take this full big breath, and you're hearing everybody breathing around you. What's the point of all of that? What's it doing to the biochemistry? What's it doing to the biomechanics? What's it doing to the autonomic nervous system? You know, you can be sacrificing the biochemistry. If you have, say, for example, a room of students, and those students, if you can hear their breathing inside that room during the slightest of pauses, those students could be overbreathing, are likely to be overbreathing, and that in turn is going to cause blood flow to be reduced, but also oxygen delivery to be reduced. Now, the instructor might be telling the students that if they're breathing more air, they're getting rid of all that toxic waste gas, carbon dioxide, without considering that carbon dioxide is the catalyst or the key for hemoglobin to release oxygen to the tissues. And carbon dioxide is also the key in terms of a vasodilator. It helps to open up the blood vessels. So people who have got poor breathing very often have cold hands and cold feet. It's a common phenomenon. And as a result of changing breathing patterns and breathing lighter, you can bring warmth into your hands and feet.
Really?
It's our entire 70,000 miles of blood vessels. So I would really say to the instructors, if you're teaching breathing, learn about the Bohr effect, learn about the oxygen dissociation curve, get your students to bring breathing off the mat. It's not just about how the person is breathing inside in the studio, but how do they breathe when they leave the studio? How do they breathe when they are doing physical exercise? How do they breathe when they are asleep? And the Breathing Cure, I wanted to bring as much science as possible. It is inundated in science, and that was deliberate because I wanted to bring it. You've got breathing being embraced completely over here, the left side. You've got the medical doctor who's very scientific over here. And really where we want to get breathing is we want to get breathing into the middle. I want to get breathing for the people. And that's where it should be going. So the Breathing Cure was to lend credibility and atomic focus was specifically for the person with a racing mind. There's no point, if a person has a racing mind, there's no point in giving them 190,000 words in small font. It's
Yes.
size 15 font, simple words, and plenty of exercises, plenty of illustrations, and just practical stuff. And it's an easy read. So that's why I enjoyed writing it. I wrote it in a couple of months. You know, it was nice. And I think it's going to impart a good message as well.
I like it. I think I might order that one. I am at 90% of the time, or maybe 95% of the time, I'm an audiobook girl. But I'm reading at the moment, real books before bed. So I might put an order in for one of those ones. It sounds very TIFF friendly,
We'll get
Patrick.
you a copy soon.
Thank you so much for today. That I think that was awesome. I learned heaps, and I think it was really in line with a few of the recent episodes I've done, especially on all of the female stuff. I've had Lara Bryden talking about hormones. I had the PMDD episode today. So I think there was so much relevant stuff in that chat. It's really fascinating. So thank you. Just remind my listeners where they can find you, follow you, get access to anything that you're doing.
Our website is, for health, it's buteycoclinic.com, and for performance will be oxygenadvantage.com, and the same on social media, so Instagram, etc. Oxygen Advantage, and the other one then is Buteco Clinic.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Stephanie. Pleasure.